Oh, God. Jesus. Oh, it's tight. Oh my God. Whew. Oh, that was not worth it for the bit. What you've just witnessed is an example of a poorly done jump scare. Even if the title of this video wasn't enough to tip you off, I'm sure that this wouldn't have worked on any of you for several reasons. It was fairly obvious that something was going to happen. I'm not exactly the scariest of people, and if you're a horror fan like me, with several years and titles under your belt, then at this point, you're more than likely fed up with the trope of the cheap jump scare. You can see the setups from a mile away, predict every possible angle the filmmakers are going to approach the scare with, and while others in the theater beside you may tense up and hold their breath, you roll your eyes and lean back, just waiting for another cheap exploitation of our evolutionary aversion to sudden loud noises to once again be utilized by inexperienced filmmakers who have no idea how to craft an effective atmosphere, design a terrifying monster, or scare us in ways that will leave a lasting impact beyond that of a sudden jolt. The reputation of the jump scare amongst die-hard horror fans has become one of disdain and annoyance over the years that it was discovered to be the cheat code that it is. You've definitely heard something to this effect before, but it's still worth repeating. If I play a sudden loud noise out of total silence and throw an image at you, no matter what that image is, it will more than likely trigger a reflex within you that you can't fight because it is literally hardwired into your DNA to react that way. Talentless horror filmmakers will look out across the sea of jolted bodies in the theater and smile to themselves, thinking that they've effectively scared their audience. But to those filmmakers, I want to ask, will that audience remember that sudden jump when they leave the theater? We've all experienced the harmless prank of someone jumping around a corner and saying boo at some point in our lives. I don't want to assume too much about you all, but I'm willing to bet that your younger brother jumping out at you didn't keep you up at night with nightmares. We all remember that trend of showing people this video or recording them playing this game. Ah, the good old days, right? It was a fun little prank and the reactions were hilariously over the top, and those delivering said reactions probably developed trust issues for the rest of their lives. What fun. I like to keep in mind, however, that whenever the cameras stop rolling on these pranks and that adrenaline wears off, the feeling left with these people is that of annoyance and anger. If your goal is to scare an audience, you don't want them feeling annoyed by your attempts to do so. This is the reputation of the modern jump scare. But it doesn't have to be this way. As a matter of fact, some of the most celebrated horror movie moments of all time are jump scares, but they're jump scares done right. There is a way to truly make these things work. It just requires an understanding of what frightens an audience, how to play with their expectations, and how to masterfully pay off built-up tension. As someone who is no expert at all in anything whatsoever and just has no active social life, choosing to sit in his room and watch movies all day, I, of course, have several examples of jump scares that do work insanely well, and also have a certain set of loose rules that creators can follow when crafting a jump scare that doesn't suck. But before we get into what both works and doesn't with the modern day jump scare, we have to go back to where it all started. A woman walks down a lonely street at night. No sound but that of her own footsteps and those of the person who's following her. Suddenly, the footsteps behind her come to a stop, and her stalker is nowhere to be seen. She picks up the pace, her eyes darting everywhere in the dark for her potential attacker, but in the minimal light of the street lamps, there is nobody to be seen. She looks behind her one last time. A low, monstrous growl grows, and then... This scene is from the 1942 film Cat People, directed by Jacques Tourneur and produced by Val Lewton. While the scene is masterfully directed and credit is often given to Lewton, with the technique being literally called the Lewton bus, it's editor Mark Robson who is the true craftsman behind this moment. For the next several decades, horror filmmakers would follow his example of pacing, use of sound, and precise cutting to build the modern jump scare. This is the blueprint of how this trend would evolve, and it's still one of the very best examples of it. The jump itself is excellent, not only because the approaching bus sounds like a growling and hissing giant cat, but because of the careful tension that was built up to that moment. Our attention is drawn to the dark void behind our protagonist. Our imagination's hard at work, drawing up whatever horror could be stalking her in the night before this giant bus crashes into the frame and jolts us out of that tense daze. Editing, tension, sound design, misdirection, payoff, it's all here in the first real jump scare, and it's from this scene that we can start to build a sort of criteria for how to do an effective jump scare. Firstly, we have to look at what this scene does best, in my opinion: building tension. While it can sometimes be effective to have a jump literally appear out of nowhere, disrupting the sense of security we've built up in an environment that should be free of scares, this is the exception to the rule. For the most part, having something just randomly pop up with no real work beforehand is lazy and annoying. It feels cheap, like the filmmakers don't want you to notice how bad they are at crafting an engrossing atmosphere or designing a unique threat. Look at the first Alien, for example. There are several great jumps in this film, but the one that has always stuck with me the most is the facehugger reveal. While the scene with John Hurt approaching the egg works brilliantly on its own, it's important to remember that the entire last 10 minutes has been building up to this moment. The crew of the Nostromo land on LV-426 and explore this ancient vessel with the same curiosity that we have as an audience. Our eyes scan the frame, taking in the incredible set design and art direction, while the droning soundscape of the planet, view from the fuzzy monitors, breathing from the explorer's suits, and Jerry Goldsmith's eerie score draw us in. We're being shown something we've never seen before. The filmmaking puts our brains in discovery mode, so 10 minutes into the scene when nothing has jumped out at us, we are as curious as Kane is to see whatever this thing is, and that's when they finally hit us with it. This is a great example of proper buildup. In Alien's case, this was a very long sequence that led to this iconic moment, but they all don't have to be this long. It can be contained to a single scene as long as you devote time to either putting the audience in the headspace of the characters or putting them on the edge of their seat, poised to leap up when you finally hit them with that moment. When Hooper dives into the dark waters of the night to investigate Ben Gardner's boat in Jaws, Spielberg is playing with our expectations a bit. Several times in the film, we've been given the point of view of the shark, so any of these shots could be our antagonist observing him before seizing his opportunity to rip him apart. We're leaning in, expecting a massive great white shark, not at all anticipating the head of Ben Gardner. The first Conjuring film starts to kind of over-rely on jump scares toward the end, something I'll talk about later, but one of the most effective in the film is the hide and clap scare, because of how in a previous scene, we are denied a potential scare with a false climax where the mom narrowly avoids the threat. Later, when she finds herself trapped in a dark basement, however, we get a fantastic payoff.
Wanna play hide and clap?
Mulholland Drive isn't even really a horror film and still has one of the best jump scares of all time. The diner sequence almost entirely spoils it too by having this character recount a nightmare that he had, effectively telling us exactly what's going to happen in a moment. But even with all of that, it still works because we don't think it's actually going to happen. Now, if we're talking about a great buildup, then it would be a crime if I didn't mention Poltergeist's clown scare. This sequence worked its way into several people's nightmares because it takes damn near the entire film to pay off. We see this clown toy several times, just sitting there lifeless before finally, in the last act, it vanishes. While the anticipation of the bang is a key ingredient to making a good jump scare work, what about the actual bang itself? Sound design, some would argue, is the most important element to making a jump scare land. When crafting a scare that relies on a mixture of image and sound, it's important to ask a few questions. Where is the sound coming from? Is it a noise that comes from the creature itself? Does a character scream to punctuate it? Is the sound non-diegetic, coming from the musical score itself as a stinger? This is where filmmakers have to be very creative with their choices. Most of the time, I prefer sound that makes sense within the world itself that's enhanced. Almost like we're in the headspace of the characters. As their senses become heightened from terror, any sound would be unnaturally loud. However, there are some more abstract noises and jumps aided by musical score that do work for me. It's all up to the creator, and if you combine a good sound design choice with a tense buildup, you've got a match made in horror heaven. I want to take a moment here and point out a more underrated type of jump scare that I don't see used as often as I think it can be. The silent jump scare. These are scares that have all the buildup and tension discussed previously, but deny the audience the loud, audible bang, and instead allow us to sort of control the pace of the scare by not cluing us into the fact that it's actually happening. By removing the loud noise that is so often associated with this trend, it can be even more effective because, with proper use of tension, our eyes are already scanning the frame. We're searching for the scare, and finding it can be horrifying. Some filmmakers choose to edit the silent scare no differently than the loud one, allowing the scare to pop up as it normally does. This gives us a false sense of security that jolts us out of our seats when it's interrupted. If the musical buildup isn't there, the sudden addition of something strange into the frame is extremely effective. We're so used to how sound is used in horror that being without it for even a few minutes can be just as nightmarish. I think it's clear that as important as it is to nail everything on set, the magic of the jump scare is made in the cutting room. Editing controls the timing, pacing, and beats of any moment. How long are you showing the threat? Does it pop up for a single frame, or do you linger on it for just long enough to let the audience really take it in? Editing is the key to the success or failure of the jump scare. Bad editing can distort your audience, making them lose track of what's even going on, which is less terrifying and more headache-inducing than anything else. Giving the viewer just enough time to take in what's happening is essential, but the flip side of that is that if you hold on the monster for too long, it becomes less scary. This is the delicate balance that has to be found in the edit. It's the one that Mark Robeson nailed in Cat People, splicing film reels together, and it's the one that we're all still chasing today using the cut tool in Premiere or Resolve or whatever editing software you prefer. So if you're making a horror short film or feature-length film and you're sitting in the room with your editor and you've got a perfect jump scare laid out before you, one that you know will get a big reaction from your audience, you've built it up properly, you've got perfect sound design, the moment just works so well, the most important thing to remember is not to let the high of having a great scare make you act irrationally. Don't get addicted to that feeling. What I'm saying is honestly the message of this entire video. The one thing that I think kills the effectiveness of the jump scare above all else. Do not overuse the jump scare. This is the biggest problem facing the trope today, in my opinion. A horror film should instill a sense of dread and terror in the viewer. The entire film should be drenched in an atmosphere that creeps out of the screen and leaves you thinking about it even on the drive home and when you're going to bed that night. It should present ideas that disturb, burying themselves deep in your subconscious to where even at the most random moments, you'll remember that terrifying concept. This is not the goal of horror filmmakers today. Their number one goal is to get you to jump as many times as humanly possible with cheap false scares, sudden loud noises, and random spooky faces that were clearly added in editing because they're hoping that this will trick you into thinking you saw the scariest movie ever. To the modern horror filmmaker, the formula is more jumps equals scarier movie. This is not true. In actuality, it's more like more jumps equals more annoying movie. I will never forget when a few friends and I had nothing to do one evening and we decided to go see Rings in theaters, knowing it was probably gonna suck. My memory of this movie was just sitting there trying to count how many jump scares happened in a row, and all of them were terrible. They were either entirely predictable or trying way too hard. It was almost like the filmmakers were afraid you were gonna fall asleep and would toss a loud sound in every now and then to wake you up. I am not kidding. They try to scare you with someone opening an umbrella in this movie. They make the sound effect louder and everything. None of these attempts at jump scares worked on me, and I spent the whole runtime just bored. But I've seen several horror movies, and I'm used to these kind of things already. It's easy for me to sit here and tell you that I didn't jump at all. But I know that I wasn't alone in that audience feeling this way. Even the most casual of audiences are starting to get tired of it. You see it in comment sections and discussion posts all the time now. There are entire websites dedicated to logging the movies with the most jump scares in them. A jump scare is most effective when it is unexpected. So inserting them over and over again spits right in the face of the very idea of them. Even horror films that I generally like aren't immune to overusing this trope. I think the first two Conjuring films are pretty great, but as they go on, the jumps become more frequent. The hide and clap scare is excellent, but those toward the end are way too predictable and try hard. Sinister is known for having one of the best jump scares ever, the lawnmower, but I can't be the only one that thinks that every one after that is far weaker. A jump scare should be the cherry on top, not the whole dessert. There was a point in the early 2000s where you can really see this getting out of hand, and I also think it's very common in sequels to movies that had great atmospheres to just throw said atmosphere out the window and in the garbage and resort to cheap scares because they can't recreate what worked so well in the first movie. So we've spent some time going over some things that I think make a jump scare work. A very, very loose set of rules and guidelines that horror filmmakers can use to make effective spooky jumpy moments. But like all filmmaking rules, they're made to be broken a little bit. The very best to ever do it have taken the audience's expectations of what a jump scare should be, how it's supposed to be presented, or even when one is supposed to happen, and flipped it on its head. I'm gonna spend the remainder of this video talking about some of my all-time favorite jump scares, because there aren't too many that do it quite like these did. Hey, you ever heard of The Shining? You probably haven't. It's kind of an underground movie. Well, it plays around with the idea of the jump scare formula like crazy, specifically in the positioning of the scares. We all know about Danny riding around the corridors of the Overlook, perfectly building tension throughout the entire movie as to what could be around any of these corners he turns. The soundtrack is this insane cacophony of weird noises, and combine those with these quick zoom-ins that act as the cut normally would, and you've got some of the best ever done. I'm particularly fond of the bear guy because it's just so weird. A lot of people, myself included, believe that Signs has some of the most memorable jump scares ever committed to film. I think the reason that these work so well is actually because of just how well the second half of the scare is presented. The terror in the reactions of Mel Gibson and Joaquin Phoenix make the appearance of the aliens that much more menacing. I also love how sparingly they're shown and how there isn't always music to accompany them, and dude, Signs is just so good. David Fincher's Seven isn't even really a horror movie, but I know that every single one of you out there remembers the sloth victim. This is an example of having a scare come out of nowhere that actually works because we expected this guy to be dead, and there's no obvious buildup happening.
You got what you deserved.
But who would I be if I didn't end this video on the jump scare? The one you've probably been waiting for me to talk about this entire time. It's amazing to me that the third Exorcist film has a jump scare that is so analyzed, written about, and hailed by horror fans as an all-time great because it damn near breaks every single rule we've come to associate with the jump scare trope. The camera is pulled way back, locked off. There are several characters to keep track of when normally we'd be following just one. The soundscape is eerily quiet with just the echoey hall carrying the small sounds of the people moving around down toward the camera. Everything about this tells us that we shouldn't be prepared for a jump scare. If you compare this to everything that I've talked about so far, the presentation is so dissimilar that there's really no reason to suspect anything. And that's why this moment made everyone shit themselves. As often as this horror trope gets a bad rap today, I still think there's value in it. If used properly, these moments can be the very thing we remember the entire movie for. I think the reason why so many people criticize the modern jump scare is because there are so many examples of them being done perfectly that there's really no reason for them to suck now. But as always, that's just how I feel. Tell me down below what your favorite jump scare is and what you think makes or breaks a jump scare. I truly love to hear your thoughts. Thanks as always to my patrons for their continued support, with a special shout out to Lapis Lazuli VA. Dude, spooky month is finally here, and I am working so hard to bring you some of my favorite topics this month. This video is just the beginning. I hope you're as excited as I am. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you again real soon. Take care.